Some offered words of support. Others simply hugged Tyler before leaving. Nobody really knew what to say. How do you comfort someone whose marriage lasted less than a day? How do you explain a betrayal that stretched across years? You don't. You simply show up. And that's exactly what many people did. By the time the reception hall emptied, exhaustion had settled over everyone. Tyler returned home with our parents. I went back to the hotel alone. Brandon never came back to our room. Not that it mattered. Our marriage was already over. I sat awake most of the night staring out the window. Sleep was impossible. Every time I closed my eyes, I found myself reliving the same moments. The hallway. The bridal suite. The look on Tyler's face. The silence. The truth. Again and again. As the sun rose over the vineyards the following morning, I realized something strange. I wasn't crying anymore. The shock was still there. The pain was still there. But beneath both emotions was a growing sense of clarity. The lies were over. Whatever happened next, at least it would be real. At approximately 8:30 that morning, Richard's phone rang. At first, he almost ignored it. The family had spent the entire night dealing with one crisis after another. Nobody had the energy for more problems. But something made him answer. That decision changed everything. The call came from a senior financial investigator who had been quietly assisting Richard's review of company records. The man sounded serious. Urgent. And according to Richard, his first sentence immediately got everyone's attention. I found something you need to see. Initially, Richard assumed the investigator was referring to additional evidence involving the missing money. Perhaps another transfer. Another account. Another transaction connected to Brandon. But that wasn't it. The investigator had uncovered something entirely different. Something that had remained hidden even during Richard's months-long investigation. Something Brandon never expected anyone to find. Within an hour, Richard asked Tyler and me to meet him at his office. The moment I arrived, I knew this wasn't routine. Richard looked troubled. More troubled than he had looked at any point during the wedding disaster. Tyler noticed it too. What happened? He asked. Richard didn't answer immediately. Instead, he slid a folder across the conference table. A new folder. One none of us had seen before. Tyler opened it first. His eyes moved across the first page. Then the second. Then the third. Slowly, his expression changed. Confusion. Disbelief. Shock. Finally he looked up. What is this? Richard leaned back in his chair. The investigator found an account. Neither of us understood. What kind of account? I asked. Richard folded his hands. A private account. Silence. One that wasn't disclosed to the company. More silence. And one that wasn't disclosed to Brandon's wife. My stomach tightened. Richard continued. The account has existed for years. I felt my heart begin racing again. Because every new discovery seemed to push the truth deeper. Every answer revealed another layer. Every layer revealed another lie. Tyler turned another page. Then another. Then another. Suddenly his eyes widened. Wait. He looked at Richard. These deposits. Richard nodded. Yes. Tyler swallowed hard. These started before Madison. The room became completely silent. Because that single detail changed everything. Until now, we believed Brandon's downfall began with the affair. We believed Madison was the turning point. The catalyst. The beginning. But the documents suggested something entirely different. The secret account existed long before she entered our lives. Long before the engagement. Long before the wedding. Long before any of us suspected anything. Which meant Brandon hadn't become dishonest. He had already been dishonest. The affair wasn't the cause. It was another symptom. Another chapter in a much larger pattern. Richard slowly shook his head. I think we've been asking the wrong question. Tyler looked up. What question? Richard's answer chilled the room. We keep asking when Brandon changed. Silence. But what if he never changed at all? Nobody spoke. Because the possibility was difficult to accept. People want to believe betrayal happens suddenly. People want to believe good people make bad decisions. It's comforting. It preserves the idea that character remains mostly intact. But sometimes the truth is harder. Sometimes people simply become better at hiding who they are. Tyler stared at the documents. Then out the window. For several seconds he said nothing. Finally he asked the question nobody else wanted to ask. How much? Richard exhaled slowly. The answer was devastating. More than we originally thought. Silence. A lot more. My stomach dropped. Richard opened another page. Then another. Then another. The total sat at the bottom. A number so large that it didn't seem real. A number capable of changing lives. A number that revealed the full scale of Brandon's deception. And when Tyler finally saw it, he leaned back in his chair and whispered 3 words none of us expected. Oh my God. Because the amount wasn't measured in thousands. It wasn't even measured in hundreds of thousands. And in that moment, we realized Brandon's biggest secret had been hiding in plain sight for years. Oh my God. The words barely left Tyler's mouth. For several seconds, nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The number at the bottom of the page seemed impossible. I stared at it again. Then again. Certain I had misunderstood. Certain I was reading it incorrectly. But I wasn't. The amount exceeded $1.8 million. The room felt smaller. The air felt heavier. Because this wasn't a mistake. It wasn't a financial oversight. It wasn't poor bookkeeping. It was a calculated deception stretching back years. A deception that had remained hidden while Brandon attended family holidays, celebrated birthdays, and built a reputation as a trusted member of both the family and the company. Richard rubbed his forehead. Even after discovering the truth, he still seemed disturbed by it. How is that even possible? I asked. The investigator had already prepared an answer. Richard slid another document across the table. The report outlined dozens of transactions spread over several years. Small amounts initially. Amounts too insignificant to attract attention. Then larger amounts. Then larger still. The pattern was deliberate. Careful. Patient. Designed to avoid detection. The person responsible clearly understood how financial reviews worked. They knew exactly where people weren't looking. And for years, it worked. Until it didn't. Tyler stared at the documents. His expression had changed completely. At the wedding, he looked heartbroken. Now he looked stunned. As though he was trying to reconcile 2 versions of the same person. The Brandon he thought he knew. And the Brandon revealed by the evidence. The 2 didn't seem compatible. Yet somehow they were the same man. Richard remained silent for a moment before speaking. The investigator found something else. Immediately my stomach tightened. Every time those words were spoken, another unpleasant truth followed. What now? Tyler asked. Richard opened the final section of the folder. Inside were property records. Legal filings. Investment documents. And photographs. Tyler frowned. What am I looking at? Richard pointed toward one image. It showed a house. A beautiful house. Large. Modern. Expensive. The kind of property most people spend years trying to afford. Neither Tyler nor I recognized it. Richard looked at us carefully. Brandon owns it. The room fell silent. What? He purchased it almost 3 years ago. My heart skipped. 3 years ago. That timeline mattered. Because 3 years ago Brandon and I were already married. 3 years ago he was still sharing finances with me. 3 years ago he was presenting himself as an honest husband. Yet somehow he owned an expensive property I had never heard about. A property purchased in another state. A property hidden from everyone. I stared at the photograph. Trying to understand. Trying to find some logical explanation. There wasn't one. Tyler looked equally confused. If he owned this house. He stopped. Then asked the obvious question. Why keep it secret? Nobody answered immediately. Because the answer was becoming increasingly clear. Secrets rarely exist without purpose. And Brandon seemed to have accumulated more secrets than anyone imagined. Richard finally spoke. The investigator believes the property was purchased using money connected to the missing funds. Silence. More silence. Then complete disbelief. Because every new discovery expanded the scope of the deception. This wasn't impulsive. This wasn't reckless. This wasn't a single bad choice. It was a long-term double life. One carefully maintained for years. I leaned back in my chair. Exhausted. Emotionally drained. Trying to process how much had changed in less than 24 hours. Then something caught my attention. One of the documents listed utility records associated with the property. Several names appeared. Most meant nothing. Until I saw one that did. I froze. My eyes returned to the page. Certain I had misread it. But I hadn't. The name was there. Clear as day. Madison Reed. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. Tyler noticed immediately. What is it? I slowly turned the page toward him. His eyes followed mine. Then widened. The room became silent once more. Because suddenly another possibility emerged. One none of us had considered. One far more complicated than we imagined. Richard saw the realization spreading across our faces. And unfortunately, he confirmed it. The investigator believes Madison may have known about the property. Tyler closed his eyes. Not out of anger. Out of exhaustion. Every answer created another question. Every truth uncovered another hidden layer. The affair was no longer just an affair. The financial deception was no longer just financial deception. Everything appeared connected. And the deeper we looked, the more complicated the story became. Then Richard revealed the detail that changed everything. The detail that connected the secret house, the missing money, and the 2-year affair into one devastating picture. According to records recovered that morning, someone had been staying at that property regularly. Not occasionally. Not once or twice. Regularly. For nearly 18 months. And when the investigator identified who that person was, Tyler slowly lowered his head into his hands. Because the final piece of the puzzle had finally appeared. And it explained far more than any of us were prepared to hear. The final piece of the puzzle appeared on a gray Tuesday morning. Less than 48 hours had passed since the wedding. Less than 48 hours since Tyler stood before 200 guests and watched his future disappear. And yet somehow, the story was still getting worse. The investigator arrived at Richard's office carrying a laptop and a stack of additional records. The look on his face told us everything before he even spoke. He had found something significant. Something that connected nearly every question we still had. Richard invited him into the conference room. Tyler and I were already waiting. Nobody wasted time with small talk. The investigator opened his laptop. Then turned the screen toward us. What you're about to see comes from utility records, security logs, and property access reports connected to the house. The room fell silent. He clicked a button. A timeline appeared. Dates. Visits. Entries. Departures. Month after month. Year after year. At first the information looked confusing. Then patterns began to emerge. And once the pattern became clear, the room went completely silent. Because the records showed someone visiting the property regularly. Not monthly. Not occasionally. Almost every week. Sometimes twice a week. Sometimes more. The investigator enlarged one section. Then another. Then another. Each visit had been logged through a digital entry system. Every entry linked to the same access code. The same individual. Madison Reed. Tyler slowly lowered his head. Nobody spoke. Nobody needed to. The evidence was speaking for itself. The secret property wasn't merely connected to Madison. She had been using it. Frequently. Consistently. For nearly 18 months. The room felt heavy. As though every answer carried twice the weight of the question that came before it. Tyler finally looked up. His voice sounded exhausted. Was she living there? The investigator shook his head. No. A brief moment of relief crossed Tyler's face. Then the investigator continued. But she spent a significant amount of time there. The relief disappeared immediately. The investigator clicked another button. This time security footage timestamps appeared on the screen. Not footage itself. Only records. Dates. Times. Entries. Exits. And once again a pattern emerged. A pattern impossible to ignore. Because Madison wasn't arriving alone. A second access code appeared repeatedly alongside hers. The same code. Over and over. Week after week. Month after month. The room remained silent. Nobody needed confirmation. Everyone already knew. Brandon. The hidden property wasn't simply a secret investment. It had become a meeting place. A place removed from family. Removed from friends. Removed from questions. A place where secrets could survive. The realization settled heavily over everyone. Because until now there had still been small uncertainties. Small gaps. Small hopes that perhaps some details weren't as bad as they appeared. Those hopes were disappearing rapidly. The investigator closed one file and opened another. This is where things become even more complicated. Immediately my stomach tightened. Every time someone said those words, another unpleasant truth followed. What now? Richard asked. The investigator hesitated. Something he hadn't done before. Then he answered. The property wasn't purchased for two people. Nobody understood. What do you mean? Tyler asked. The investigator turned the screen again. This time displaying purchase documents. Ownership records. Financial agreements. And there, buried among pages of legal paperwork, was a name none of us expected. A third name. The room froze. Richard leaned forward. Tyler stared. I blinked repeatedly. Certain I had misunderstood. But I hadn't. There really was another person connected to the property. Another person connected to the finances. Another person connected to the deception. Someone none of us had suspected. Someone who had attended the wedding. Someone who had looked Tyler in the eye and congratulated him. Someone who had shaken hands with guests and posed for photographs. And when the investigator finally revealed who that person was, Richard's expression changed completely. Because for the first time during the entire investigation, the betrayal extended beyond Brandon and Madison. Far beyond them. And suddenly, what appeared to be a story about an affair and stolen money was becoming something much larger. Something that reached deeper into the family than anyone ever imagined. Something capable of reopening wounds we thought had already been exposed. The investigator looked around the room. Then quietly spoke the name. And the moment he did, nobody said a word. Because nobody could believe what they had just heard, nobody said a word. The investigator's revelation hung over the conference room like a storm cloud. For several seconds, it felt as though the entire room had stopped breathing. Richard was the first to react. Slowly. Carefully. As though he was afraid speaking might somehow make the situation even more real. "You're certain?" The investigator nodded. "I verified it twice." Silence returned. Tyler stared at the documents spread across the table. His eyes fixed on the third name. A name he recognized. A name all of us recognized. Because it belonged to someone who had been part of our lives for years. Someone trusted. Someone welcomed into family gatherings. Someone nobody had ever imagined could be connected to any of this. The discovery changed everything. Not because the person was directly involved in the affair, but because it revealed just how extensive the deception had become. The secret house. The hidden money. The false stories. The missing hours. The affair. None of it existed in isolation. Each secret had protected another. Each lie had helped conceal the next. And now the entire structure was collapsing at once. Tyler rubbed his eyes. He looked exhausted. Not physically. Emotionally. The kind of exhaustion that comes when every answer creates 3 new questions. "How long?" he finally asked. The investigator opened another report. According to available records, approximately 2 years. 2 years.